Good morning. I feel the energy in this crowd this morning. This is a big room. Usually when I apologize for Sync, the room's a little smaller, but no more apologies, right? Sync is good. You gonna hear a big hand for Sync? Sync is solid. And I think part of the reason that a lot of you are here is because you know it is good, and now with the team site Sync that we announced this week, you guys are getting ready to deploy it hopefully soon. We've seen great pickup on the next-gen client. It's actually surpassed the legacy client in terms of the monthly active usage, and it's just great to see that hockey stick going. So we're really excited that you're here this morning to learn more about Sync. We're gonna dive pretty deep. Starting off, I'm Tony East. I'm the group program manager for Sync. So I spend a lot of time with Sync. I love Sync. You guys obviously are loving Sync because you're here and you're gonna sit and talk about deploying Sync, which is a great way to spend a Wednesday morning at 9. So we're going to go through the deploying on Windows, deploying on Mac. We have a new Mac standalone package. Let's hear for that, right? Yeah. And so we're going to show you how that works on Casper and some other things. But we're going to talk about sort of the pragmatic pieces of deployment, how you can think about it. Because if you think about it, Sync is really the key to unlocking the benefits of the cloud. So most productivity today still happens on the PCs or on laptops and your main machine. We can talk about being all how mobile we are and everything else, but at the end of the day, when you want to do PowerPoint, you sit down and you do your thing. So Sync is the technology stack that's going to help get your users' data into the cloud. And if you deploy Sync in the way that we're going to talk about this morning, you can do it without changing the way that your users work. So if they're using My Documents today, they can continue to do that. And then all of their stuff will just show up in the cloud. And then at some point, they have what I call the aha moment. Someone shows them when they're on their mobile device, and they say, hey, look, I did this thing, and I saved the day because I could get all of my files and I could share it, and I couldn't believe I could get to it right from my phone. This happened with my wife. She came home one day and said, oh my gosh, OneDrive is amazing. And I said, yeah, I know. And she said, no, I was at this PTA thing, and somebody came up to me and asked me a question about the document, and I said, just a second. And I scrolled, and she said she got a link, sent it off, and it was this magic. But then that person was like, what'd you just do? And so it spread like that. So it's like the light bulb goes on, and people realize the power of the cloud. What they don't know is that they'll also get Delve, what do we call it? The Delve Discovery Service. You get all the collaboration goodness. So you get lots of stuff, but that's that aha moment. Our telemetry shows us that when a user connects with two endpoints, usually Sync and a mobile device, their engagement and activity just skyrockets. It's like that light bulb going on in that aha moment. So this morning we're going to talk about that. So really we think about, this clicker is really probably wandering too far. You think about really in three ways. First, we're going to prep for the rollout. We're going to think about kind of what your world looks like. There's a lot of different scenarios for different enterprises. Every enterprise is a little bit different. Then we're going to talk about how to install the actual mechanics of getting it deployed with SCCM, or if you're on Mac with Casper. And then we're going to talk about how you would actually roll it out. You want to make sure you don't impact your infrastructure. We have some controls for that, and we'll talk about how you can make sure that all your files can get up to the cloud, and your users can start doing that. So you really came to see Pat, because Pat Hendricks, let's give a big hand for Pat. And so Pat's going to take over, and she's going to talk about some of the details of Sync.
Thanks, Tony. Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Patricia Hendricks, Pat Hendricks. So I've been a PM on the Sync client team for about 6 years now. And over the last year, I've really spent going deep into OneDrive deployment. We spent a lot of time working with industry experts like yourself to learn about how OneDrive deploys, to learn about what your organization's needs are. And we've really compiled a lot of good practices, good techniques for you to apply in your own deployment and have a successful deployment. So I'm super excited to be here and actually talk about some of these things because we get a lot of good questions about them. And these are just tips that'll help you guys have a much more successful, fast, seamless deployment. So with that, let's dive right in. So before you ever get any kind of bits on your users' machines, you really want to stop and be thoughtful about understanding your file's ecosystems. On a micro level, you want to think about your individual users' habits. Where do your users work every day? Where are they putting their files? Are they putting files on their machine? Are these files in documents, in pictures? Or are these on network shares? Do your users already have a bunch of files in OneDrive? Now, kind of on the other extreme, on a macro level, you want to think about content generation across your entire company. Where are the bulk of your files being generated today? Do you have gigabytes of data, terabytes of data? Is this data in the cloud? Or is it across your users' machines? You want to think about that as a whole because the two of these things together, both on the micro level and the macro level, are going to determine how you deploy and how fast you deploy. So typically in a deployment, you're going to see a pretty high spike in initial network usage in probably the first couple days, the first couple weeks of your deployment as going back to that conversation of the file ecosystem. You're going to see this network utilization as that file ecosystem starts to shift, either from the PC up to the cloud or from the cloud back down to the PC. And so after a couple of weeks when things start to level out, you'll see a dip and then growth will just start to increase organically. So let's actually talk about getting the bits on the box. So before we do anything, let's actually just learn how OneDrive installs. So I'm going to come over to my Windows PC here. I need to sign in. And so let's actually take a look at how OneDrive installs on the PC. So right off the bat, I have a little bit of a cheater here in that I'm running a Windows 10 machine. And OneDrive comes pre-installed on all Windows 10 machines. So I'm going to show you where OneDrive installs. And just keep in mind that you can apply these same principles down to Windows 7 as well. They work exactly the same. So I'm going to bring up Windows Explorer. And everyone's first thought here, and it's a pretty understandable thought, is that OneDrive would install under program files. And of course, it's kind of hard to see, so I'll walk you guys through this. And so here I am under program files where a lot of my other applications like Microsoft Office and Adobe install for the local machine. And so sure enough, there's a Microsoft OneDrive folder here. But let's actually take a look and see what's inside this folder. So what you'll see here is not actually the install. You'll only see the OneDrive setup.exe. This is our installer. And so it's really important to remember that OneDrive doesn't actually install on the local machine under C program files. OneDrive installs per user on the machine. So let me show you where we actually do install. So you can just find this today by opening up Explorer and going to Local App Data, Microsoft. And let's see if we can find this OneDrive folder. And sure enough, there it is. So this is my local app data folder. And what you'll see is this is where you'll actually find the install. You'll see that I have the executable, the OneDrive exe. And then you'll also see that I have things like settings and logs. And all of these are specific to me as an individual user. So now let's take a look at what another user on the machine would look like. So sometimes I let Tony use my machine. So let's take a look at what Tony's local app data folder looks like. And sure enough, you'll see that Tony also has an install of OneDrive under his local app data folder. So you'll see that he has a OneDrive executable, and then he also has a series of settings files and log files that are associated with just his account. And so the key takeaway here is that OneDrive is going to install under the local app data for each user on the machine. So now let's go back and actually talk about what this means for your install. So now that we know how and where OneDrive deploys, let's actually apply this knowledge into a deployment. So as I mentioned before, I was on a Win 10 machine, and the OneDrive client already comes pre-installed on all Windows 10 machines. And more importantly for you, it also comes installed for every user on the device. And so that's going to make your job easier if you're rolling out OneDrive on your Windows 10 machines. You can actually completely skip the step of worrying about how to get the bits on the box because the bits are already there. So we get a lot of questions about Office 2016. So the deal with Office 2016 is the OneDrive setup.exe is included in all Office 2016 builds. The nuance here, though, is that Office 2016 is only going to drop the OneDrive setup.exe under C program files. It's not actually going to install it per user. So if you're doing a deployment with Office 2016, you're going to want to pay attention to these next couple slides, and so you can apply this in your Office deployment. So one thing that you guys probably noticed is under C program files, the installer that I was talking about is an exe. It's not actually an MSI, which might be a little different for your organization, especially if you're already familiar with deploying MSIs with Office and things like that. But don't worry, deploying an exe is actually pretty simple, and then we'll show you how in these next few steps. OneDrive exe itself, when it installs, must be run with elevation. Now, this isn't anything super new, but just some information and some context as to why we do this is OneDrive installs little sync overlays in File Explorer that show your users when your files are syncing, when they're up to date, or when they're in error. And those icon overlays live under your local machine registry. And so in order to access that, the OneDrive setup.exe does need admin privileges. So that's just why it needs to be run with elevation. So these last two are where we get the most questions in a deployment. And so remembering these two steps are the key to having your own successful deployment. OneDrive setup.exe installs only on the current logged on user. Now, at a glance, this may seem like a pain. Why do we behave this way? So OneDrive installs under the local app data for each user. Installing under local app data lets OneDrive seamlessly auto-update itself without requiring elevation. This is a really, really important tool that Tony will talk to you a little bit more later that ensures that your users always have the highest quality bits with the latest fixes. And so don't worry, it seems like it's a pain, but it's actually pretty easy to do with SCCM, and we'll show you how. So kind of in the same vein, OneDrive itself must be run in the user context because it's installed in the user context. If you remember in my little mini demo here, I had settings files and log files for each user OneDrive was installed under. And so when OneDrive runs in the context of the user process that invoked it. And so this is a Windows system. And so if OneDrive is run elevated with admin privileges, OneDrive is going to think it needs to run as the admin user. And it's going to be trying to reference the settings and log files of the admin user. And you can see why this might be a problem if the current signed-in user isn't the admin. So if anyone has ever seen that dialogue in their own deployment that says OneDrive can't be run with system or admin privileges, this is why. This is what we're trying to protect you against. So let's actually walk through a real example. So let's see how we can use SCCM to deploy the OneDrive Sync client. For a detailed walkthrough, definitely check out this really great blog post at OneDrive SCCM deployment. And it has the same information, just it deep dives a little bit farther than what we can do here. And so since normally this would take some time, I'm going to be using the power of screenshots to walk you through this example. So step one, right off the bat, you might be doing something a little different than what you're familiar with. You're going to be creating a script-based application. So you're going to manually specify your application information, and you're going to select type script installer. And I'm going to go over what the script is going to be in just a bit. So the second step is pretty simple, all straightforward, setting your install and uninstall programs. So first, right off the bat, you want to make sure that you have the latest version of the OneDrive setup.exe. And so normally you can get this from onedrive.com/download, or also remember, if you have deployed Office 2016, you're already going to have the OneDrive setup.exe under C program files. So you can just reference that setup installer if you were deploying Office 2016. So that makes your job a little easier. you're going to set your install and uninstall programs. And the command line parameters for install and uninstall are pretty simple. We use a /silent install, and we use /uninstall for uninstall. So let me actually walk into some more details about why we use this /silent. So why silent? So without using this silent command line parameter, during the install, your users are going to see UI. They're going to see a little dialog, and more importantly, they're automatically going to be launched into our setup wizard on completion of the install. And this is a totally fine deployment if you want to deploy this way. But typically, we want you to be thoughtful about how best to start engaging your users and to get them to sign in. And the reality is, most users just aren't going to sign in to a random dialogue that pops up when they walk into work one morning. And so by actually executing on a silent deployment, you get to control when your users see the first run experience, or excuse me, the setup wizard. And we'll show you how. Come on. There we go. All right, so these last two steps are where things start to get really interesting, is adding your OneDrive detection logic. And if you're curious about what this step is for, in the next step, you'll see that we're going to set this deployment type to run on user logon. And by logon, we actually mean every user logon. And so that means that if I sign in again, this deployment is going to try to run again. So we're going to create a simple script here that first checks if OneDrive is already installed for the current user and only launches the install if OneDrive isn't already installed. And you can literally just go to aka.ms/OneDrive SCCM deployment, and you can copy and paste the script, the custom deployment script, into your own SCCM deployments. So this step is pretty important in that it prevents multiple installs of the OneDrive Sync client. Now, if you remember back in my little mini demo, I had a bunch of different version folders. And so every time OneDrive installs, it's going to create a new version folder. And it's perfectly fine. It's not a problem. But just to promote good file system hygiene, we recommend that you add this step. So your last step here, and this is the most important step in your deployment, is setting the logon requirement. So first in this screen, you're going to install for system, and that's going to give you the elevation you need, or we need, to install those icon overlays under your local machine registry. So these next two steps are the key takeaways of this whole deployment. So you want to set the logon requirement to only when the user is logged on. And so what this will do, and this is super important because this will actually give OneDrive setup.exe a target user to install under. And so without this, OneDrive is just going to install itself under C program files because it's not going to actually know what user to install on. So the user needs to be logged on in order to actually successfully install for that user. So this last thing is allowing the user to view and interact with the program installation. Make sure this is checked because this is just part of the impersonation of the user. We've actually run tests to see what happens if this checkbox is not checked, and we find that OneDrive setup.exe tries to install only under C program files. So it's really both setting the logon requirement to run only on user logon and allowing user interaction that actually has a successful deployment here. There we go. So as a bonus, if you fell asleep during those last few slides, we've created an application package for you to import directly into SCCM. You can get that at OneDrive SCCM package, and literally you'll just take that, import that directly into SCCM, customize it for your own deployment, because it's just a template for you guys, and then you guys would be on your way. And that includes all things like the custom detection logic and setting the logon requirements. So if you fell asleep, don't worry. Just go here and grab your own SCCM package. All right, so let's talk about prepping the desktop here. So at this point, going back to this machine, so at this point, success, you have the bits on the box. Your next step here is going to be to prepare your users' machines and get them ready for your users to actually sign in and start syncing with the OneDrive Sync client. So going back to that conversation about understanding your users' file ecosystems, a lot of you guys are dealing with users who already have a ton of content in their documents folders, in their pictures folders. And when you migrate them to OneDrive, you don't want them to stop using those folders. You don't want to break any of their interactions with these files. You want them to seamlessly be able to start using OneDrive just now with those files in the cloud. And so what I'm going to walk you through is a really simple way that you can redirect this existing content into OneDrive and seamlessly get that content to the cloud. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you what my Documents folder looks like. And so I have this folder called Documents, which is a Windows known folder. And so I have been using all these files, working on this machine for a really long time, and then I save my content to this Documents folder. And so what you're going to do here is that this is a two-step process. So the first thing that you're going to do as an organization is that you're going to create a location that OneDrive will sync to at a later time when the user signs in. Because notice that right now, there's no OneDrive process running. So no user is actually signed into OneDrive at this point. So when you create that folder location that OneDrive is later going to sync to, then you're going to seamlessly redirect the user's Documents and Pictures folders into this location that you just created. So let me actually show you what this would look like. And so I, as an admin, have created a folder called OneDrive Fabricam, which is the company I'm working for. And so let's actually go to the user profile, which is where I've created this, and let's search for OneDrive Fabricam. And so I've created this folder, and I've used existing Windows GPOs to redirect documents into this OneDrive Fabricam folder. And again, note that these are existing Windows GPOs that you'll use here. So let's talk about where OneDrive comes into play, because at this point, again, I'm not actually signed in. So your next job is to make sure that when the user does sign into OneDrive, you want to make sure that they sync to this OneDrive Fabricam folder that you created. So let's take a look at the OneDrive group policies that we have available for you. So what I've done here is I've just taken the OneDrive ADML and ADMX file templates that are available for you as part of our deployment package and just downloaded those from our package and imported them directly into our Windows policy definitions. And so for these, you're going to want to go under your user configurations and go to administrative templates. Let's look at this OneDrive folder. And so there are two settings that in particular that you're going to use for this feature. And so you'll notice that, again, I have this OneDrive Fabricam folder. So my goal is to make sure that when my users sign in, they sync to this Fabricam folder. So you're going to use two policies for that. The first one is you're going to set the default location for your OneDrive folder. So this one's pretty simple. You just want to make sure that when a user is going through the setup wizard, we default them to this OneDrive Fabricam folder that you've created. It's pretty simple. And then the next step is key. You want to prevent your users from changing the location of this folder. And that's to ensure that during the setup wizard, they are forced to use that OneDrive Fabricam location and they can't move somewhere else. So you'll use a combination of those two policies. And that's actually it. And so once the user signs in at this point, they'll automatically start syncing to OneDrive Fabricam, and voila, their documents, their photos, anything you redirected to that folder will seamlessly start to upload to the cloud. And that's it. So the next thing I'm going to talk to you about is bandwidth throttling. So remember how we talked about having that pretty high initial spike of bandwidth usage? Let's actually talk about how you might be able to control that. So for this one, we're going to go over to computer configurations, and under admin templates, let's go back to this OneDrive folder. So let's talk about how you can control your upload bandwidth. So I just want to point out here, too, that most of you guys will probably never have to use this setting. OneDrive has spent the last year making sure that we are fast and reliable, and we do a really good job at getting that initial sync out of the way. But we understand that this probably doesn't work for everyone. You might be a small branch that has bad network, or you might be a really large company that is being very aggressive with your OneDrive deployment, which is great, but you have a large file ecosystem that you just need a little bit more control of. And so if you were at Ed and Jason's talk yesterday, you would have seen what the user experience looks like for this. But now I'm going to show you the opposite end of how this admin setting is actually set. And so you as an admin are going to use this policy to set a percentage of available bandwidth usage, somewhere between 10 and 90%. And what we're going to do here is that OneDrive is going to continuously sample your available network speed and use the appropriate percentage of that available speed. So the value of this is that in times of really high network traffic, let's say it's early morning, everyone's getting into their machines, we're going to just continuously sample and realize, oh, only a small amount of network is available. We better not bog that down. And we're going to take a fraction of that available network. And the nice thing about this is we're continuously resampling. And so later in the evening, when network traffic slows down a little bit, we can actually scale up to use more of the available network. And so we're just continuously smart about this. And you'll use that in using this admin control. So all right, so at this point, we've prepped our machines, and we're ready to start engaging our users and getting them signed in and syncing with OneDrive. So right off the bat, the first thing we really want to acknowledge is, in an ideal world, there would be a way for you as admins to seamlessly sign in your users into OneDrive. Unfortunately, we're just not there yet today, but we know how important this is to you guys. And so I can't stress enough how important this scenario is to you, and we hear you, and we'll get there. And so what I'm going to do today is I'm going to show you 2 really quick and easy ways that you can engage with your users in the meantime. So the first thing I'm going to do is, talking to a lot of you, honestly, a lot of you guys actually like to engage with your users through email. And so I'm going to show you an easy way that you can have a one-click method for your users to launch the OneDrive setup wizard. So let me show you. And so I'm going to go into Mail. And my friendly IT pro has announced that OneDrive is available. And I'm going to read over this mail. You know, you have the power of OneDrive to take advantage of all the great features. You know what? That sounds really great. And so actually, I'm going to just click this link and start syncing OneDrive. And you know what? Actually, we did one better. I think Tony actually embedded that into this image. Let's take a look. Oh, Outlook, it's perfectly safe. Come on here. And voila, just with one click, I was able to launch the user directly into the setup wizard. And so let me show you what this actually is. And so let me hover over this. And it's probably, I don't think anyone can really see it. But all this is a very simple URL that's called odopen://whack. And again, that's just a URL. You can include this in Mail. You can include this in online documentation that you have. But this URL is a protocol handler that launches the OneDrive Sync client and directly launches the OneDrive setup wizard. So the next evolution of this is going to be to allow you guys to actually specify what tenant you'd like the user to sign in, and for us to enforce that. So this is just a really quick and easy way for the user to just launch the setup wizard. And at this point, they would just sign in. They would just type their email address, hit sign in, and the setup wizard would walk them through the rest of their deployment. So that's method number 1. Let's talk about a more organic method that users have available to them. So a lot of users are already using OneDrive for Business. And now if they're using the web client a lot, they'll actually see that they have this sync button. So the interesting thing about the sync button is it's leveraging the same technology that you just saw in that mail experience. So let's actually click sync and see what happens. Click yes. And there we go. Sync is going to directly launch the OneDrive setup wizard. Now you'll notice there's something a little bit different about this experience. In this experience, the web client was actually smart enough to pre-populate an email field directly into the OneDrive setup wizard. And you'll notice that I actually can't change that. And so I'm actually going to only be able to sign in with that account, which is great, which is what you'd want. And so when I hit sign in, oh, it's going to take a while. All right, well, you get the idea. I'll just walk through the rest of the demo. And so I would sign in, and then the setup wizard would just quickly walk me through the rest of setup. And literally, it's just 2 more screens, and it takes about 2 minutes for your users. And that's it. So let's go back. So at this point, you have everything you need to know to have a successful deployment. You know how to get the bits on the box, you know how to think about your file ecosystem, and you know how to prep your machines for your users. So at this point, really, the only thing you need to think about is how fast you want to deploy. And us here on the OneDrive team are super excited for you to start deploying. We want you to deploy as fast as possible and go big. But at the same time, we definitely recommend do what's right for your organization. And so in other words, start small and find your groove. Wink. All right, I'm off. All right, now back to Tony.
Nailed it. Thanks, Pat. That was great. Okay, so that was the Windows side of things. And how many Mac deployments do we have out there? Quite a few. Quite a few. That's great. So when we had our early conversations with customers, we got a lot of feedback that taking the app out of the store and taking the receipt out or whatever that's called and putting it in a package and deploying it was a real pain, especially if you happen to do international deployments where you had to go to a store for each language and do all this stuff. So we listened, we heard you, and I'm just gonna jump right in and I'm gonna show you a deployment. I'm gonna deploy, this is the little rose for my profile name. The guy that built the demo machine, that was his little joke. He thought it would be funny if I was a rose. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to run the deployment. So I'm going to use Casper. It's cloud-based. I'm going to use it to deploy right to this machine. So you'll kind of get the idea of the flow, but you'll get to see the whole process. What I've done is I've taken the Casper admin tool and I've already uploaded a couple of the files that I'm going to need. So I have the OneDrive PKG, which is actually the application package, and I have a couple of different configuration files. I have a profile that will basically do the settings for the machine that we want, like the location and maybe to block personal OneDrive. And so that is right here. We have this plist file here. And so here you can see I've disabled personal sync, and I've got basically I'm specifying a specific folder for the user. So just like Pat had talked about, you can do the same technique where you can actually map this right to the place where the user's documents are. So I've uploaded these particular files, and so now we're going to go over to the ADM console. And so we're going to go over here and let's get rid of this. And my session expired. We're going to go right to the Casper control panel. All right. So I have 3 steps. One, I'm going to go ahead and deploy the package itself. So let's go ahead and create a new policy for that. All right, so we're going to call this OneDrive app install. We're going to go ahead and do it on login, log out, and I have this great thing called recurring check-in, which means I can force it to happen. It checks every 10 minutes, but I can force it, so we can do it right now. And let's go ahead and configure the packages. And as you can see, it automatically sees the packages I've already uploaded to the cloud, and so I can pick the OneDrive PKG here. And then the last thing I need to do is to set a scope. So what machines do I want to target? For this demo, I'm just going to pick this, which is Jonathan's MacBook Pro. I'm going to add. I'm finished here. And that should do it. So let's go ahead and save that. And we'll go ahead and show it on the old JSS dashboard. And we get to see how the job is going. And there is my job ready to go. If you have thousands of machines, you'll see a lot of you are already using Casper. So in the interest of time, let's go ahead and go over to a terminal window, and let's go ahead and force that policy check. No. Let's go ahead and do a policy grab. Sometimes it takes a minute here. We'll let that go. So let's go ahead and set up our next thing while we're waiting for that. So the next thing we're going to want to do is go ahead and configure those settings on the machine. So we're going to go ahead and push down a configuration profile. And that configuration profile Come on, network. Nice. All right, let's check this. Let's see how this is. Of course. Let's just refresh this page. All right. Looks like we're back in business here. So let's create a new configuration profile. You know, you do these demos like 100 times, and then when you get up here, something goes sideways. All right, let me just. Hey, there we go. All right, yay, right? Okay, so let's set the OneDrive settings here. And let's go. We're going to add that custom. It's basically, this is a custom setting, and we're going to configure that by uploading a file. So that's the plist file that I showed you. We've taken some of the Casper tools, and we have created a plist file out of that PKG there. There we go. All right, so you can see that it has taken that plist file and it has actually picked up the settings that I had in there. So it's going to disable the personal OneDrive, and it's going to set the default folder. All right, so let's go back here and hit the scope. Let's add our target machine again. Man, this network is just really killing me. Well, that's good news. That means that while I was messing around with this tool, it went and installed the OneDrive desktop application. Let's go look at my applications folder, and let's just see, oh, there is OneDrive. Yay, all right. All right, let's try one more time, and then I'm going to move on. Let's grab the other policy. So let's do, oh, there it is, no scope defined. Let's see if we can edit that. Did it wake up? There we go. Edit was, that guy wins a prize. All right, so let's see how that's going here. Let's show that on the dashboard. And let's see how we're going here. Let's go and see if we can force that to come down. And what that's going to do is, if it all works here, we're going to see that we're going to deploy that. We're going to deploy a policy down. And so it shows up in the policies field here in the settings. So you'll see, oh, looks like it's not there yet. So let's keep going for a second. Ah, look what came down. The OneDrive settings. All right. So that's essentially, so the last one that you would do is you'd set the policy to actually auto-run that, so that's what would launch and start engaging your users. So again, we've set up the Mac standalone package so that it works with Casper, and it has all the features that you need. The great thing is that it's out of the sandbox. So when you do the store applications, you're restricted from doing some things that you really want to do in your deployment, like run at logon. We can't set that by default out of the store. It's just a rule that's put upon us. The other thing is that the Finder overlays, the little sync checkboxes and all the cool things that happen, that's another thing that we're not allowed to set by default, so the user has to go and discover those things. And so now with the standalone package, we're allowed to do that stuff, and that's all part of the things that we register when we install the package. The same configurable options that you have with the PC client, you can again push it to a certain folder, you can lock it down, you can do all that stuff. So we'll continue to get it working with Casper. I mean, it does work with Casper, but we'll make sure that all of the options that Casper supports. So we'll look for feedback. That package is available, will be available in the next couple weeks for you to start taking and playing with and giving us feedback. So we really look forward to feedback on that. So let's talk about securing your deployment. So there's some other really good talks that go much deeper into the security, some of the security things that you can do for your overall deployment. And so when you think about sync, there's a lot of it's really powerful, but it's also really scary, right? The idea that all your files from the cloud could go onto any machine. Again, it's really cool, but you want to make sure it's the right machine and the machines have the right controls, and that the right users are getting at them, right? So we've done two things towards this. So the first is we are going to support conditional access. So that means that you can set some policies around what kinds of machines and what the condition of the machine is in terms of it's all the AV antivirus stuff and any other conditions that you set as policy on the machine before you can establish the sync relationship. And I'll show you that in a minute. The other thing that we've done is we've integrated with the Windows Information Protection Platform, or WIP. And the Windows Information Platform allows us to communicate that a particular place on the disk or the particular set of folders is actually owned by the enterprise. And so we can do some things where if you're syncing personal and business content, we can make sure that you don't accidentally save stuff in the wrong namespace, because we know one's personal and one's business. And so that separation, it really helps with that accidental disclosure. And we'll talk a little bit more about that too. So conditional access, again, the AAD team has produced an Active Directory authentication library stack that we've now started using as our authentication stack. It's the same stack that Office uses. So that's part of the way we're going to get to that automatic login that we want to get to, that Pat said we haven't quite got there yet. But that's going to help us along the way to get there. As I said before, it ensures that the machine is in compliance with your corporate policies before establishing the sync relationship. Now, to be clear, things like geo-policies don't really make sense because you have all the information synced, and if you move your location and stop syncing, it just feels broken. For protection, for those scenarios or scenarios where you're worried about a machine leaving a building, there's other there's other technologies like remote wipe and other things that will help secure that scenario. But it just didn't make sense for us to do that geolocation for breaking the sync relationship, because you still have most of the data on that machine. Now, you can say, look, I don't want anyone to set up the sync relationship unless they're inside the walls of my corporation, and that's okay. It's just that once you've established a sync relationship, we believe that the best user experience is for that sync relationship to continue. Again, you have control to break that sync relationship and wipe those files off, but not using this particular set of technology. And then WIP. So the Windows 10 WIP platform basically appears to us as a normal file system, but what it's doing as we hand it certain files is encrypting those to the disk. And so because we have done that deep integration, we don't have to know whether they're encrypted or not. We just declare who owns the file. And I'll show it in a second. The key here, again, is to prevent that data leakage. There's, a lot of places want to start locking down stuff, but users really, really need to do personal stuff as well as business stuff a lot of times. And so this is a way that you can make sure that they don't accidentally save stuff to the wrong place. So we use the word enlightened, so that just means that we're aware of the capabilities of the Windows 10 platform, and that we're a trusted application. So we behave in a way, and we're well known. And so again, they verify the signature of our app and all the things so that nobody else can impersonate us and come and try to do things there. And so when you do want to be able to transition between corporate ownership of the file and personal ownership of the file, IT gets to decide whether that's okay. So you can either allow it and log it, sort of so you can have an auditing trail and say, hey, you took this file and you put it in your personal OneDrive, and I noticed that you changed the ownership from us to, why'd you do that? Or you can completely block it so that you are unable to actually change the ownership. And let me show you these two things. So let's do a demo of both conditional access and WIP. This desk isn't quite tall enough. All right, first is conditional access. So what we're looking at is the Active Directory. It should be. Give me a second. How about now? 1, 2, 3. Did it go? Did we get it? Yeah. Nothing. Should we take Pat's? Should we take that one? The demo gods were unkind to me today. Yay, all right. Thank you, I know you guys are with me, this is great. Okay, so what we're looking at is the Active Directory Management Console. So I'm the admin of my enterprise here. I've got Contoso Clothing, and I'm gonna go in here and I'm gonna look at some of the options that I have. So I'm gonna look at our applications, and I'm gonna see that I have, I'm gonna go ahead and manage SharePoint Online here. And I'm going to go ahead and configure this. And so I'm going to scroll down, and I can see my device-based access rules. So I'm going to go ahead and enable those rules, and I'm going to put these rules in force for all users except admins. So let's go ahead and save that. And the AAD, this nifty little action screen down here, shows you what's been going on. All right, so now I'm going to pretend like I'm a user, and I'm going to try to sign in. And I'm going to try to sign in from this machine, which isn't actually on the Contoso domain. So this is like me at home. Okay? So let's go into settings. Let's go ahead and add an account. Let's go ahead and grab that. I'm going to be the CEO, because you know where this is going, right? So I'm the CEO, and I get home on my home machine, and I want to sign in. And it's going to ask me twice to sign in because, oh, it's not. It's not supposed to let me sign in. Yeah, right. That's funny. CEO's admin. So one of the things, I did not do this demo yesterday, because one of the things is within 24 hours of changing the policy, if you've had a successful login, there's some things that get cached that I can't clear that lets you through again. But that is not what's happening here. So let me see what's going on. Well, strike two. Let's just make sure nobody's set as admin here. Hold on. Okay. So you can also make exceptions for those users. So you can actually, like we did, we added an admin group. And if you wanted to go, and you can add any of the groups that you have. So had this demo gone well, I was going to put my exec in my special snowflakes group, and I would have added him and seen that he could sign in at home. So again, you can make exceptions for the policy, but enforce it for the users that need that control. So again, this lets you set up sync on the machines that are compliant with your policies, while making sure that the sync technology doesn't make a lot of your files move to machines that you don't want it to move to. All right, so then I'm going to show you conditional access. I'm going to show you WIP. And WIP is actually, I'm using it on my account here at work, or here at Microsoft. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a couple things. One, Office is integrated with it now. So if I make a new document and I say, this is my new plan, and I go to save that document, I have both OneDrive personal and my Microsoft OneDrive account. So when I look and I go, oh, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and throw that in my personal account, and I say, so let's see what that did. So that put it in my OneDrive. And you can see on all of my OneDrive, all of my Microsoft files, it shows the file ownership as corp.microsoft.com. So if I take one of the files that's in this folder and I drop that down into my OneDrive personal, if I take my company plan and I throw it into my personal folder, what happens is it tells me I can't sync the item. So it says, hey, you're trying to take something that's owned by the corporation and put it into a place that I know to be a personal folder. And so if I go and look, it's like, you can see the ownership here is Microsoft.com. Interesting. So I can right-click on it, and this is what I talked about before, where the IT folks have the option how they can expose this setting. So this is the place where the user would change it to personal and say, no, that's really something that's okay for me to put on my personal file. So you're letting the user exercise some discretion, or in the current configuration I'm running in, it's blocked and it doesn't actually do anything. So I can't actually change that. And the only way I can get that file to sync, so that file's not leaving my machine ever, right? If I try to copy it to a USB stick, there's just no way for that file to get out. And so the only way for me to get back into a good state with sync is actually just to move it back or delete it. And so then OneDrive gets happy again, and away we go. So that's conditional access and WIP. So, sorry, I'll do questions at the end. Great. Okay. So I want to do a word on automatic updates. Let me switch over to number 5. A lot of people in the conversations I've had with customers say, hey, I know that your client does automatic updates, but can we turn those off? Because we don't want automatic updates. And so we start to drill in and try to understand why. And we asked because, and the reason that automatic updates are important for us are, if you think about sync is a state replication machine, right? We have the cloud, which is the truth, and we're trying to replicate that state on the local machine. We spend a lot of time looking at places where we don't match, where state doesn't match. So we do an audit of ourselves after we think we're in sync, and if we're not in sync, we fix that. But then we log that. And so we're constantly watching telemetry and knowing when we're not actually getting it done. So we didn't upload a file that we should have, or we thought we did, or something happened along the way. So all the time, constantly, we're finding little things and we're fixing things. And so if you think about the service and the client, they're a matched pair. And so as we roll changes and roll improvements, we want to make sure that everyone gets them. You can imagine the worst thing that could ever happen to us is if we had a really, really bad bug and users didn't get the fix, or some users didn't get the fix because the IT didn't have a chance to roll it out. And so because of the frequency of our rollouts and the fact that we need that matched set of bits running, we've made our client update itself. So what we can talk about is the user impact of those updates. So the big objection that we've heard is, hey, we don't want to have to train our users on a new thing. And so we appreciate that. And so what we're trying to do is think about separating what I call like the plumbing, the part that's actually doing the sync, versus end user features or really big new things that might show up that might impact your organization. So we've evolved, so we have a sort of a way to ramp up these new features that would be end user facing. So like a good example of that is our team site sync stuff, right? So bunch of you guys may have the new Sync, the next-gen Sync client currently doing OneDrive for Business, and you still have the legacy client doing all of your team site work. And you're going to want to plan that deployment. Well, when we get to the end of the year and we update that Sync client, you don't want all of a sudden everything to start switching over and causing, hopefully it doesn't cause anything, but you want to kind of control when that happens. So that's an example of a place where we'll update the client. The new capabilities will be there, waiting, and then when you guys decide to trigger that deployment, we'll publish instructions on how to actually make that takeover happen. And so that's the kind of way we're considering that. And I spent a lot of years in Office, and I owned the setup and deployment of Office, and so I'm really sensitive to how organizations run IT and how they want to be planful of this stuff. But it's super important that we can update the client so that we can really give your users the best sync experience. So, happy to talk about that offline. But that's kind of that fundamental thing. It's like you really, really don't want to try to block the port or block the URL or do anything that sort of inhibits us from updating, because your whole ecosystem will be much, much better off if we're allowed to do our automatic updates. So just to wrap it up, you've seen how you can deploy OneDrive on Windows. You sort of saw it on Mac. I'm sorry about that. But it really does work. And I think about it that we're kind of on this journey together, right? We spent last year doing OneDrive for Business Sync. This year has been Team Site Sync. And now we got, with document redirection, we were starting to get a story. We still do have that gap of that fully unintended zero-touch type of deployment, and we're working on it. And we'll continue to evolve the operational and deployment tools that you guys want. So we know that you want to see some telemetry, some things that you can look at how your deployment's going, what the kind of usage and so forth, how the sync client's doing. And so we're working on some things in that arena, and we'll have more to share next year. And we know that there's things for us to build. So we want to listen to the feedback and continue to evolve this, as we've taken it from a consumer product to an enterprise-ready product. So that's what we have this morning, and happy to take some questions. There's some other great sessions. Be sure to hit them. Out of range. Thank you. Can you maybe go to the mic if you have a question?
What do you recommend for organizations that sync their My Documents to a network drive?
So that's a great question. So if that's the way the users are working, we haven't completely worked it out, but like one thought would be maybe create a local partition for with the same letter as the network drive they've been using, kind of move stuff there and let it sync up, or sync down if you're going to do a bulk migration to the cloud and then back down. So like we're sort of kind of noodling on that best. Hey, this is the way our users work, and we'll be publishing. We'll think more about it and publish a white paper there.
And if we didn't want to move those documents from the network, there would be no way to directly sync from the network.
Well, so the problem with the network syncing to a network share is if you have two machines running the sync client, both pointing at that same network share, they get in a fight. And one sees a change and syncs it, and then it comes to the cloud, and the other one goes, oh, there's a change, and so it downloads it, and we call it a fork fest. You get lots of versions of the file, and it's disastrous. So we don't support syncing to a network share. It's kind of not what sync was designed for, and so.
There are some third-party tools that help that that we use as part of the rollout. But one of the things you kind of have to do prior to that is the network share read.
Right.
Read only any migration from the network drive.
Thanks. Well, we'll switch. We'll go back and forth.
Do you have any advice for during the onboarding process dealing with unsupported file name characters and things like that? You mentioned there might be some telemetry tools coming, which I imagine would help, but in the meantime,
Yeah, so there's a couple things that you can do here. So in terms of supported file name characters, that list of unsupported file names just get smaller and smaller. And so really the last two that we're working on is pounded percent. And,
Yep.
and so you've probably heard a lot about that at this point. And so for because that list just gets smaller and smaller, I would actually say if there are specific ones to your organization that are not being addressed as part of that list, let us know and let's have that conversation.
okay.
Couple things. The business of creating a sort of staged folder and forcing that to be the sync folder name, and then taking some of the library folders like documents and desktop and redirecting those to that location. Could you talk a little bit about how that would be done? We tried to do that at one point earlier with the old client, and it did not go well. So I was just curious if there was a method.
Yeah, so there's actually a published method for this available online today. If you go to support.office.com, or if you follow up after me, or follow with me after, I'll send you a link to this documentation. And so the steps in this process are, these are Windows GPOs that you can deploy to redirect a Windows known folder to a very specific location. And so the steps, the sequence of steps is use an admin, would create a folder called OneDrive dash your tenant name. And then you would use these existing Windows policies to redirect the known folders to this location. And then you would use our OneDrive policies to enforce the use of that created location. We have online documentation for this that goes into a lot more detail on exactly what steps to set, what policy to deploy, which one it is, and how to set that.
Does using that created folder have any impact on the new client's ability to take over an existing sync client from Groove?
So this would, and so, but the counter to this one is you can redirect those documents and pictures folders into an existing Groove folder. And so if Groove is already syncing to a folder called, such and such, you can just redirect to that folder. And then when the user signs in with the OneDrive sync client and does takeover on that Groove folder, those redirected folders will already be there. So you don't have to create a brand new folder. You can use an existing one as well. You can use the existing Groove folder.
Okay, thank you.
Good morning. You mentioned that the OneDrive client had to be installed per user, and I get how that happens with Windows 10. And 1607 specifically. But when we were using 1511, obviously the OneDrive client that was in 1511, we only had personal use capability with, or at least without a hack. But so we've been rolling out with Office 2016 with 1511. The OneDrive client was inside of it, and I noticed that I'm not doing anything special to install for user. Now you get two clouds unless you disabled OneDrive for Business with group policy, then the personal cloud would go away in 1511. With 1607, I realized that we don't need the Office installation anymore. But I'm just curious, what's going on? You're saying it has to install per user, but I'm installing it per system in the task sequence, so it's not installing when the user is logged in, yet I see the OneDrive cloud in the test bar.
And I'm so sorry too, 1511 is, and I'm not up to date on my Windows versions.
1511 was a November release.
It was the November release. That's actually really interesting. I haven't heard that behavior before. Why don't you and I sync up offline, because I'd love to learn more about what's going on there.
Okay.
Good morning. You talked a lot about utilizing GPOs for machines on network. What have you put together for machines that aren't on network? Is Intune going to be able to push the client down? Or I guess what is your recommendations for, because a lot of our customers that we work don't have 100% of their customers on network.
So how many machines are you talking? What version of Windows are you running?
It depends on the client, but a lot of Windows 7.
Okay, yeah, so we don't have a specific solution with Intune yet, but we'll definitely take that back and take a look at that.
I mean, is there another like third-party tool that you can use to maybe help push that to non?
Unfortunately, I don't know any off the top of my head. I would actually love to learn about more. If you know of any, like we can definitely chat for sure. But I'm sure
Cool.
that's why you're asking this question here. And so we don't have, so you're right, GPOs are really for managed devices, and we don't really have a good solution for non-managed devices at this point. And so let's actually talk offline and try to understand which scenarios in particular you'd like to enable here, because maybe that's actually something that is maybe better suited for something else.
Cool.
So let's chat and understand more about what
Well,
your
it
scenarios
sounded like you had something for Mac there that you're utilizing.
So Casper is the
Casper,
Mac.
yeah.
Casper's the Mac, and
But it's only for
I believe
Macintosh,
it's
I
only for
believe.
Mac, but I'm
Yeah.
but I'm not
Okay.
positive.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks.
Okay, kind of tag teaming from this gentleman earlier. Branding of OneDrive versus OneDrive for Business creates a lot of confusion with customers. For desktop client, we use OneDrive for Business, and all the iOS apps are called just OneDrive, right? And the Excel and the PowerPoint, all that other stuff. So the question is, is Microsoft looking at rebranding that OneDrive versus OneDrive app for Business, and just naming it one so it avoids confusion with users?
So the OneDrive for Business app that you see is the legacy sync client. The new, the next gen sync client is just called OneDrive, and you can add multiple accounts to it. So that so essentially that client is not the one that you're going to be using for OneDrive. SharePoint Online or OneDrive for Business. So I would say we're kind of moving away from that
So
to
the
brand
customers who have already joined in and getting synced up using the OneDrive for Business, is there a migration process that'll
Yeah,
happen?
there's takeover. So when you install when you actually set up that account, it'll actually take over in place. There's lots of documentation about that online.
Gotcha. Okay, thanks.
And I'm sorry, I think we skipped this middle row here. Apologies.
It's hard to see.
So two very quick questions. One, do you support running the new client inside a remote desktop services, either 2012 or 2016?
Oh, I'm sorry. Say that one more time. Running.
You guys, so running this new client with remote desktop services?
Remote desktop. So we don't. Basically, remote desktop, you're either, again, hitting a network share for most of the content, for the user's content, or you're able to kind of multi-instance, and you could imagine setting up two sessions that are pointing at the same thing. So again, it's just not a scenario that we support. And obviously, if you're not doing anything or not persisting any of the user data, and it's kind of like trying to pull it down in real time, Sync really isn't a great technology for that, because we have to kind of spin up and sort of pull everything down. So at this time, we totally understand that the scenario is important, and we're gonna, I think that we'll be looking at ways to address that scenario in a good way. So stay tuned. Nothing to announce now. We hear you, and but we just don't have anything to say.
Okay, and just very briefly, is there any way of having a user's entire profile synced with OneDrive, or so they could be completely mobile, so they can log into any device and have their entire user profile, app data, all their documents, all their desktop items, favorites, everything appear as soon as they log on? For example, if their device is joined with Azure AD, for example.
Yeah, that's not a scenario that we directly support. Like, certainly you can do one of the documents you can redirect with the group policies is your desktop, and that's
but if it's joined with Azure AD, so if it's like the gentleman said over there, if it's a device that's never going to come to the office, if it's completely out of the office.
If it's so it's not domain joined at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's just not something that we support today. So we're going to stick around, but we need to kind of get out of this room to let the next folks come in. So if you want, let us grab our machines, and we'll just go right outside, and we'll see you in a second. Thanks everybody for coming.